Could you abandon your home knowing your animals would freeze to death? In February 2021, 62-year-old Bonnie Laporte faced this impossible choice when a devastating ice storm left her Virginia home without power or running water. While neighbors fled to hotels and shelters, Bonnie made a decision that would test her limits of endurance. She would stay behind with her beloved animals, 2 horses, 15 chickens, and 6 German shepherds, refusing to leave them to die in the bitter cold. What happened next would become a story of survival against impossible odds. If it wasn't for them, let's put it this way, I wouldn't be here, Bonnie would later tell reporters. They've made me get up when I didn't feel like it. Hey there, I'm so grateful you're watching this incredible story. If you're enjoying it so far, please hit that subscribe button and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps us share more of these amazing survival stories that show the incredible bond between humans and animals. The small town of Victoria in rural Lunenburg County, Virginia, had seen winter storms before, but nothing like this. Trees bent under the weight of ice until they snapped, taking power lines down with them. Roads became impassable. Temperatures plummeted well below freezing, with brutal winds making it feel even colder. Most residents evacuated immediately, heading for hotels or staying with family in areas where power remained. But Bonnie couldn't bear the thought of abandoning her animals. As a former veterinary assistant, she knew what would happen to them if left alone without heat or water in these conditions. Her well pump required electricity, meaning no water for drinking or sanitation. The horses would freeze without proper shelter and care. The chickens, often overlooked in emergencies, were her pets too. And her 6 German shepherds, loyal companions who depended on her completely, couldn't fend for themselves. My animals come first and their well-being, Bonnie explained. Nobody cares that much about chickens. I do. They're my pets. She had prepared somewhat, filling bathtubs with water before the storm hit. But she never expected the outage to stretch from days into a week and then beyond. No one did. Even Southside Electric Cooperative, the local utility company, was overwhelmed by the scale of destruction, with thousands of rural customers affected across a vast service area. On day 1, Bonnie's house temperature began dropping precipitously. Without electricity, her heating system was useless. She gathered blankets, layered her clothing, and focused on keeping her animals alive. The dogs huddled together for warmth, but the horses and chickens outside required constant attention. Each morning, she'd wake before dawn to break ice on water containers, trying to provide at least some liquid for her animals to drink. The dogs, the horses, the chickens, they're using dirty water, whatever I can scrape up. Ice, she later recounted. Her own water supplies were dwindling fast. Food was becoming a serious concern. The meat in her freezer had thawed, and she would need to consume it quickly before it spoiled. By day 3, temperatures inside her home had fallen to near freezing. Outside, a bitter wind drove the wind chill factor well below 0. Many of her neighbors who had stayed were now leaving, unable to endure the conditions any longer. Emergency services were overwhelmed, focused on clearing roads and restoring power to critical infrastructure. Bonnie's world shrank to a brutal routine. Wake up shivering, check on each animal, distribute what little water remained, find something to eat, and try to stay warm enough to survive until nightfall. Then do it all again the next day. The cold seemed to penetrate her bones, making even simple tasks exhausting. As she huddled with her dogs at night, trying to conserve body heat, she wondered how long they could last. Utility crews were working around the clock, but rural areas like Victoria were notoriously difficult to restore quickly. For every mile of power line, Southside Electric served fewer than 10 customers, making repairs time-consuming and labor-intensive. By day 5, Bonnie was facing a grim reality. This was no longer just an inconvenience. It had become a fight for survival, for herself and for every animal in her care. Morning broke on day 5, with temperatures having plunged to just 19 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. Inside Bonnie's home, it wasn't much warmer. Her breath formed visible clouds as she moved through the silent, darkened rooms. Her joints ached from the relentless cold, and exhaustion pulled at her like a physical weight. The water she'd stored was nearly gone. What remained had to be rationed carefully among her animals. The horses presented the greatest challenge: large animals needing gallons of water daily. Bonnie had resorted to breaking ice from puddles and melting it for them to drink. You get up every morning and you think, is today the day they'll fix it? Bonnie would later tell a local reporter. And then night falls and you're still sitting in the dark, still freezing. Her routine had become mechanical. Wake up, check each animal, distribute water, find food, stay alive. Repeat. Her dogs sensed her distress, staying closer than usual. The smallest, a 2-year-old female named Luna, had taken to sleeping directly against Bonnie's chest for warmth. On this 5th morning, Bonnie noticed one of her oldest chickens wasn't moving much. The bird's comb had darkened, a sign of frostbite. Bonnie brought the chicken inside, creating a makeshift nest in the kitchen. If the power didn't return soon, she'd lose more animals. This thought drove her forward, despite her own declining condition. News from outside was sparse. Her cell phone battery was nearly dead, and she was conserving what little charge remained for emergencies. From brief exchanges with passing utility workers, she learned the destruction was even more widespread than she'd imagined. Tens of thousands remained without power across Virginia, with rural areas hit hardest. For every mile of line that we have on average, we have less than 10 members on that line. Southside Electric's vice president had explained in a press conference that Bonnie couldn't watch. The utility was predicting power might not be restored until March 1st, which would mean over 2 weeks without electricity. By midday, Bonnie faced a critical moment. Her stored food was running low. She'd consumed most of the perishables from her thawing freezer, but now faced dwindling supplies. The roads were beginning to clear, and she could potentially leave to get supplies, but that would mean leaving her animals unattended in the freezing conditions. She bundled up in every layer she owned and headed to her barn. The horses nickered softly as she approached, their breath forming white plumes in the frigid air. They needed hay, and lots of it, to generate the body heat necessary to survive these temperatures. As Bonnie forked the last of her hay reserves into their feeding area, a crushing realization hit her. She couldn't sustain this much longer. Her own strength was failing. Her fingers had lost sensation from constant exposure to cold. Simple tasks took twice as long as normal. Even opening a can of food had become a struggle. "I just sat down and cried," she would later admit. "For the first time, I wasn't sure we were going to make it." That afternoon, Bonnie made the difficult decision to reach out for help. Using the last of her phone battery, she called the local emergency management office. The operator was sympathetic, but explained that resources were stretched beyond capacity. They would try to send someone, but couldn't promise when. As night fell again, Bonnie gathered all 6 German shepherds into her bedroom. Their body heat, combined with every blanket she owned, created a small island of warmth. The chicken she'd brought in was improving slightly, in the marginally warmer indoor temperature. Outside, the wind howled through trees still heavy with ice. Occasional cracking sounds, branches giving way under the weight, punctuated the night. Each one made Bonnie flinch, wondering if it might fall on her house or barn. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by the necessity of checking on the animals and the impossible cold that seemed to reach through all her layers of protection. Her last thought before drifting off was a desperate prayer. Please let tomorrow be the day the lights come back on. Little did she know, her ordeal was only halfway over. By the morning of day 6, Bonnie knew she needed to become more resourceful or face losing her animals and possibly her own life. The temperature inside her home had dropped to 31 degrees. Frost had formed on the inside of her windows. Every breath was visible in the frigid air. Her first task was securing a sustainable water source. The bathtubs she'd filled were nearly empty, and melting snow and ice was too time-consuming and yielded too little water for her larger animals. Inspiration struck when she remembered the rain barrels behind her garden shed. They'd chilled so, been full before the freeze, and now contained solid blocks of ice. Using a hammer and screwdriver, Bonnie chipped away at the frozen barrels, collecting ice chunks in buckets. She brought these inside, placing them near the one small area where she'd been burning candles for minimal heat. The slow melt provided a steady, if limited, water supply. Hey everyone, can't believe you're still with me on this incredible journey. If you're watching this, please hit subscribe and let me know. In the comments where you're tuning in from, are you prepared for emergencies like this in your area? Your support means everything to us. For food, Bonnie faced harder choices. Her own supplies were dwindling, but her animals needed nutrition to generate body heat. She decided to divide her remaining oats and rice between herself and the horses, supplementing their diet with the last hay. The chickens received her final cups of dried beans, soaked in melted ice water. The German shepherds posed the greatest challenge. As carnivores, they needed protein. Bonnie had been sharing her canned goods with them, but now faced a critical shortage. She made the difficult decision to break into her emergency food stores, supplies she'd kept for years but hoped never to use. "You do what you have to do," she would later explain. "Their lives were in my hands. That's a responsibility I take seriously." On the afternoon of day 6, Bonnie had her first stroke of luck. A utility truck stopped near her property. The workers couldn't restore her power yet. The main lines feeding her area were still down, but they provided invaluable information. Crews from multiple states were now arriving to help with restoration efforts. They also gave her a case of bottled water and 2 flashlights with fresh batteries. This small kindness renewed Bonnie's determination. That evening, she implemented another survival strategy. She moved her mattress into the kitchen, the smallest room in her house, and blocked the doorway with blankets to create a tiny warm zone. All 6 dogs and the recovering chicken joined her in this makeshift shelter. By day 7, Bonnie had established a system. Mornings were for animal care, feeding, watering, and ensuring all were sheltered as well as possible from the elements. Midday was for collecting and melting ice for water. Evenings were spent in her kitchen sanctuary with the dogs, preserving heat and energy. She began wearing all her clothes in layers: 3 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of pants, 4 shirts, plus hats and gloves, even indoors. At night, she slept in short bursts, waking regularly to check on her animals. The horses proved remarkably resilient, their thick winter coats providing significant protection. Bonnie constructed windbreaks from fallen branches and tarps, creating sheltered areas in their paddock. The chickens were more vulnerable, so she moved their portable coop closer to the house, covering it with blankets at night. On day 8, disaster nearly struck. One of the younger German shepherds, a curious male named Max, disappeared during a bathroom break outside. Bonnie spent 3 terrifying hours searching in the snow before finding him huddled in a drainage culvert, shivering but alive. "I think I aged 10 years in those 3 hours, she would later say. "When I found him, I just sat in the snow and held him, both of us shaking." By the end of the 8th day, Bonnie was showing signs of hypothermia despite her precautions. Her thinking was becoming sluggish. Simple tasks required intense concentration. She recognized the danger signs from her veterinary training. If she succumbed to the cold, her animals would have no one. That night she made perhaps her most ingenious adaptation yet. She created a tent over her kitchen mattress, using shower curtains and blankets, forming a tiny microclimate that trapped heat from herself and the dogs. Inside this cocoon, the temperature rose enough that, for the first time in over a week, she didn't feel cold to her bones. On day 9, with temperatures still hovering below freezing and no sign of power restoration, word of Bonnie's situation began to spread through the community. A distant neighbor who had evacuated to a hotel remembered Bonnie's dedication to her animals and became concerned when he couldn't reach her by phone. This neighbor, Jim Harrelson, contacted the local sheriff's office requesting a wellness check. Deputy Sarah Martinez was dispatched to Bonnie's property, arriving mid-morning to find a scene of determined survival. "I remember pulling up and seeing smoke from a small fire pit she'd built outside to melt snow," Deputy Martinez would later recall. There she was, this older woman, bundled up like an Arctic explorer, tending to her horses. "I was amazed she was still functioning in those conditions." Martinez immediately reported back, mobilizing the community's emergency response network. By early afternoon, members of a local church group arrived with critical supplies: propane heaters, more bottled water, non-perishable food, fresh hay for the horses, and feed for the chickens and dogs. More importantly, they brought human connection after 9 days of isolation. Bonnie broke down when they arrived, the emotional toll of her ordeal finally surfacing. "I didn't realize how much I needed to see another face," she admitted. "I'd been talking to the animals so long I was starting to answer for them too." The propane heaters transformed Bonnie's situation, raising the temperature in her kitchen sanctuary to a relatively comfortable 55 degrees. For the first time in over a week, she could remove some of her layers of clothing and sleep for more than an hour at a stretch. Local news outlets picked up Bonnie's story, broadcasting it that evening. The response was immediate and overwhelming. By the following morning, day 10 of the outage, a steady stream of visitors arrived with additional supplies, offers of help, and profound admiration for her dedication. A local veterinarian, Dr. Rebecca Thornton, made the treacherous drive to check on Bonnie's animals, bringing medications and supplies. "All things considered, they're in remarkable condition," Dr. Thornton reported. "It's a testament to Bonnie's care that they've survived this long in." These temperatures. The most touching gesture came from a group of local farmers who arrived with a small generator. It wasn't powerful enough to heat the whole house or run the well pump, but it could operate a small space heater and recharge Bonnie's phone, creating a vital connection to the outside world. "We take care of our own around here," explained Frank Miller, one of the farmers who'd brought the generator. "Anyone who'd suffer like this for their animals deserves our help." With her phone working again, Bonnie learned the full extent of the disaster. Over 100,000 Virginia residents remained without power. The ice storm had been one of the worst in decades, with some areas receiving over an inch of ice accumulation on trees and power lines. Utility companies from multiple states had sent crews working around the clock to restore service, but the damage was so extensive and widespread that even with reinforcements, progress was painfully slow. On social media, Bonnie's story went viral, with thousands sharing messages of support and admiration. Local businesses began organizing larger relief efforts, not just for Bonnie, but for all those affected by the extended outage. "I never wanted attention," Bonnie said when shown the outpouring of support online. "I just wanted to keep my animals alive." By the evening of day 10, Bonnie's situation had improved dramatically from just 24 hours earlier. The generator provided enough power for minimal lighting and the space heater. Community members had established a rotation, checking on her twice daily and bringing fresh supplies. The horses had proper feed again. The chickens were recovering in their reinforced and insulated coop. All 6 German shepherds were healthy, if somewhat thinner than before the storm. Even the injured chicken was back with its flock, fully recovered. That night, as Bonnie prepared for sleep, she reflected on the dual nature of crisis, how it had pushed her to the very edge of endurance, yet also revealed the profound capacity for kindness in her community. "When everything is stripped away," she would later tell a reporter, "you learn what really matters. For me, it's my animals and the goodness of people I barely knew." She still had no idea when power would be restored, but for the first time in 10 days, Bonnie fell asleep without fear for tomorrow. Despite the community's support, 11 days without power had taken a serious physical toll on Bonnie. The constant exposure to cold had aggravated her arthritis, making every movement painful. Her hands, particularly affected by the chill during animal care, were stiff and uncooperative. Simple tasks like opening food containers or buckling a horse's blanket had become major challenges. Sleep deprivation compounded her physical decline. Even with the improved conditions, Bonnie had developed a pattern of waking every hour to check on her animals and the generator. This vigilance, while necessary for survival, had left her with dark circles under her eyes and a constant mental fog. "I feel like I've aged 20 years in 11 days, she confided to Dr. Thornton during a follow-up visit. "Sometimes I have to stop and remember what I was doing just minutes before." Her weight loss was concerning as well. Despite the supplies brought by community members, Bonnie had prioritized her animals' nutrition over her own. Dr. Thornton estimated she had lost nearly 15 pounds, weight she couldn't afford to lose from her already slim frame. Perhaps most alarming were the patches of frostbite on her fingertips and toes. Though minor, they required careful monitoring to prevent infection. In the warming temperatures of her kitchen, they had begun to thaw, bringing a new kind of pain, a burning sensation that kept her awake, even when exhaustion demanded sleep. The psychological effects were subtler, but equally significant. Bonnie had developed a heightened startle response to certain sounds, particularly the crack of ice-laden branches, which reminded her of the early days of total isolation. She found herself constantly counting supplies and recalculating how long they would last, even though community support had largely resolved her resource shortages. "It's like my brain is stuck in survival mode," she explained. "I know intellectually that help is here now, but some part of me is still waiting for everything to get worse again." Deputy Martinez, who had continued checking on Bonnie regularly, noticed these changes. During her visit on day 11, she gently suggested that Bonnie consider temporary evacuation to a shelter where medical professionals could better address her health concerns. "You've done the impossible keeping these animals alive," Martinez said, "but now you need to take care of yourself too." Bonnie's response was immediate and unwavering. "I started this with them and I'll finish it with them. They're still depending on me." This determination, while admirable, concerned those now involved in her care. The Rural Electric Cooperative had announced that power restoration for the hardest-hit areas might take another 3 to 5 days. Medical professionals worried about Bonnie's ability to withstand further strain. That afternoon, a compromise was reached. A local animal rescue organization offered to send volunteers twice daily to care for the horses and chickens if Bonnie would accept transportation to a medical facility for evaluation and treatment. The German shepherds could stay with her at a pet-friendly emergency shelter established at the local high school. Bonnie initially resisted, but eventually agreed to a modified version of the plan. She would allow herself to be taken for medical examination, but insisted on returning to her property afterward. "Check me out, patch me up, and bring me back," was her condition. The medical assessment revealed the extent of her physical ordeal. Beyond the visible frostbite and weight loss, Bonnie was severely dehydrated, showed signs of muscle deterioration from constant shivering, and had developed a respiratory infection from breathing the cold, dry air for so long. "Most people half your age wouldn't have survived these conditions for this long," the attending physician told her. "It's remarkable you're still functioning." Bonnie received IV fluids, antibiotics for her infection, and treatment for her frostbite. The medical team strongly recommended hospitalization, but honored her wishes to return home, providing her with medications and detailed care instructions. As day 11 came to a close, Bonnie was back in her kitchen sanctuary surrounded by her dogs. Her body had been pushed to its absolute limits, but her spirit remained unbroken. The generator hummed steadily outside, providing minimal but crucial power. "My grandfather used to say that comfort makes you soft, but hardship makes you strong," she told Deputy Martinez that evening. "I never really understood what he meant until now." The physical toll had been immense, but Bonnie had discovered a reservoir of endurance she never knew she possessed, forged in the crucible of necessity and love for the animals in her care. On the morning of day 12, the weather finally began to shift. The bitter cold that had held Virginia in, its grip for nearly 2 weeks, started to ease, with temperatures climbing above freezing for the first time since the storm. This small mercy coincided with an unexpected development in Bonnie's saga. A crew of electrical workers from Tennessee, part of the mutual aid response to the widespread outages, had been assigned to the main transmission line serving Bonnie's area. Their foreman, Curtis Jenkins, had heard about the animal lady who had refused to abandon her pets during one of the worst winter storms in decades. "My wife kept showing me these stories about her on social media," Jenkins would later explain. "I realized we were working the grid section that fed her property. We made it a personal mission to get her back online." The standard restoration protocol prioritized repairs that would return service to the largest number of customers first. This typically meant rural properties like Bonnie's would be among the last to regain power. But Jenkins and his crew made a decision that morning to deviate slightly from the protocol, not skipping any critical repairs, but working through lunch breaks and extending their shifts to reach Bonnie's area sooner. Their task was daunting. The ice storm had brought down multiple poles along the rural road leading to Bonnie's property. Trees had fallen across lines, and in some spots, the transmission infrastructure had to be completely rebuilt rather than simply repaired. "I've been doing this work for 23 years, and I've never seen damage this extensive over such a wide area," Jenkins said. "It was like picking up the pieces after a hurricane, except everything was frozen solid." Meanwhile, Bonnie's story had reached even further. National news organizations picked up the local coverage, broadcasting her determined stand to audiences across the country. This exposure brought an unexpected form of assistance. A representative from a major pet food manufacturer contacted Bonnie, arranging for an emergency delivery of supplies for her animals. More significantly, the company pledged to cover the veterinary expenses for all her animals once the immediate crisis had passed, an enormous relief given the potential for long-term health issues following such extreme conditions. Locally, another form of heroism emerged. A group of high school students, led by their technology teacher, repurposed old car batteries and solar panels to create a more robust charging station for Bonnie's essential devices. They arrived mid-afternoon on day 12, installing their makeshift system with the enthusiasm only teenagers can bring to a crisis. "We've been studying alternative energy all semester," explained Jasmine Chen, one of the students. "Ms. Laporte gave us a real-world problem to solve. It's the most important test we've ever taken." Their innovation provided enough consistent power to run a small refrigerator, allowing Bonnie to safely store her medications and preserve perishable food brought by well-wishers. As day 12 progressed, Jenkins and his crew worked with increasing urgency. The warming temperatures created new challenges. Ice began melting and falling from trees, sometimes onto power lines they had just repaired. The ground, frozen solid for days, began to thaw into mud that complicated equipment positioning. Yet they persisted, driven by the knowledge that their work meant more than just restoring electricity. It represented the difference between survival and comfort for a woman who had come to symbolize resilience in the face of disaster. By late afternoon, they had reached the final pole before Bonnie's property. The damage was severe. The transformer was beyond repair and would need complete replacement. Standard procedure would have been to document the damage and schedule a specialized crew for the next day. Instead, Jenkins radioed for the necessary equipment to be brought forward from their next scheduled stop. "We're finishing this today," he told his crew. "She's waited long enough." As sunset approached, Bonnie was in her barn, checking on the horses, with the help of a local teenager who had volunteered to assist with evening chores. She had no idea of the determined effort taking place just down the road. The first indication came when her dogs began barking, a different bark from their usual alerts, almost excited rather than warning. Then she noticed something she hadn't seen in almost 2 weeks. The yard light outside her barn had flickered on. "I didn't believe it at first," she would later recall. "I thought I was hallucinating from exhaustion." But the light remained on, and then another, and another. After 12 days of darkness and bitter cold, power was flowing to Bonnie's property once again. The moment electricity returned to Bonnie's property marked the technical end of her ordeal, but the aftermath would extend far beyond the flick of a switch. As heat gradually returned to her home, water began flowing from taps, and appliances hummed back to life. Bonnie found herself in an unexpected position, as a symbol of determination that had inspired thousands. The first night with power restored was almost disorienting. After nearly 2 weeks of darkness broken only by flashlights and candles, the sudden brightness of electric lights seemed harsh and unnatural. The sound of the furnace cycling on startled her from a fitful sleep. The normal had become alien. "I kept waking up thinking I needed to check the generator or melt more ice," Bonnie explained. "It takes time for your mind to stand down from constant alert." The physical recovery would be lengthy. Dr. Thornton, who had continued monitoring Bonnie's condition, estimated it would take at least a month for her body to fully recuperate from the extended exposure to cold and the nutritional deficits she'd experienced. The animals remarkably fared better. The horses showed no lasting effects from their ordeal, their natural hardiness having served them well. The chickens, once warmed and properly fed, resumed laying eggs within days. The German shepherds bounced back with the resilience typical of their breed, though they remained unusually attentive to Bonnie, as if still protecting her from the crisis they'd endured together. As news spread that Bonnie's power had been restored, community support shifted from emergency assistance to helping her rebuild her normal life. Volunteers organized a cleanup of her property, clearing fallen branches and repairing minor storm damage to outbuildings. The local feed store provided a month's supply of animal feed at no cost. Neighbors restocked her refrigerator and pantry. Reporters continued to request interviews, fascinated by her story of survival and devotion. Bonnie accepted these reluctantly, uncomfortable with the attention, but recognizing that her experience might help others prepare for similar emergencies. "I'm not special," she insisted during one interview. "I just couldn't leave them. Anyone who truly loves their animals would have done the same." Yet her story had resonated far beyond animal lovers. It spoke to fundamental human values: responsibility, perseverance, and the capacity to endure extreme hardship for the sake of others. In a world often focused on convenience and comfort, Bonnie's choice to face punishing conditions rather than abandon her dependents struck a powerful chord. The broader impact became apparent in unexpected ways. The local emergency management agency began revising its disaster response protocols to better account for households with multiple animals. A regional animal welfare organization launched a program to provide emergency generators specifically for rural properties with livestock. The electric cooperative accelerated plans to improve infrastructure resilience in rural areas. Curtis Jenkins, the electrical crew foreman who had prioritized restoring Bonnie's power, visited her a week after service was restored. He brought his family, including 2 young daughters, who had followed Bonnie's story online. "I wanted them to meet someone who exemplifies real strength," Jenkins explained. "Not the kind you see in movies, but the quiet kind that gets up every day and does what needs doing, no matter how hard." For Bonnie herself, the experience had transformed her understanding of both self-reliance and community. She had discovered depths of endurance she never knew she possessed, while simultaneously experiencing the profound impact of neighbors, caring for neighbors during crisis. "I've always been independent, maybe to a fault," she reflected. "This taught me that independence and interdependence aren't opposites. They're partners. You need both to survive when things get truly dire." The most profound change was invisible but fundamental, a shift in perspective that only those who have faced extreme circumstances can fully comprehend. Daily irritations that once seemed significant now registered as trivial. The simple pleasure of a hot shower, once taken for granted, became cause for gratitude. 1 month after power was restored, Bonnie stood in her pasture at sunset, watching her horses graze peacefully. The property showed few signs of the crisis that had engulfed it. New leaves were beginning to emerge on trees that had survived the ice's weight. Life had returned to normal, but normal would never feel quite the same again. "People keep asking if I would do it all again," Bonnie said, as the horses moved toward her for their evening feed. "And the answer is yes, without hesitation, because when you're responsible for lives, whether human or animal, you don't measure the cost. You just do what needs to be done and find the strength along the way."